exposure is to be seen, right? But if you're in the sea of same, how do you stand out? How do you become
Yeah.
memorable? Awareness is to be known. And so, for example, what I'm doing right now, I'm a guest on a very reputable podcast that you have, and I come in and I give my insights. These insights aren't ChatGPT. They're almost 30 years of experience.
Martians landed.
Yes.
Wearing Prada suits.
Yes.
Drinking Henry Seltzer.
Yes.
Chewing juicy fruit.
Yes, and?
Your branding here.
Yes, brand.
Your message here.
Yes, and?
A verse about
Yes.
your product here.
Yes.
I'm Hersh Rephun.
Yes, and?
I'm a message therapist.
Yes.
And I have a podcast.
Yes, brand.
That's right, that's it.
Yes.
We'll help you fix the world.
Yes.
Or your bottom line.
All right.
Your bottom line.
Get it. I get it. Welcome to the Yes Brand Podcast.
In the hot seat today on Yes Brand is Ron Netanel. Ron is Chief Visionary Officer behind Ideologic Brand Lab. He spent decades working behind the scenes at 8-figure companies, billion-dollar enterprises, building brands that move markets. And now he's showing entrepreneurs how to think like these big brands, so that when they're trying to build a culture shaping identity and capture mind share that drives demand, they can do that and they can scale with real authority. And he's created something called the Brand Shift Code. And we're gonna talk about it. And I love the idea of teaching brands to think like big brands, because not enough of them do. Sometimes we think we're going to be either we're a mom and pop, we're a small business, or we're thinking big or scale. All these words get thrown around, but really, what does it come down to? What makes your business grow, and how do you do that? Welcome, Ron, to
Thank
Yes
you,
Brand.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, you said it all right there. I help entrepreneurs shift their mindset by stop thinking like with small business tactics and start thinking with big brand strategy.
Yeah.
So that's where I like to kind of be in my space, and I like to help people grow and elevate their brands.
Well, let's dig into a little bit of your big brand background.
Okay.
And how that came about.
Wow, that's going back 27.5 years to be exact. But who's counting?
You're a numbers guy. Clearly, you're a numbers guy.
It's all in the metrics. But no, on a serious note, I started out working with small business and micro businesses, I guess at the time, and then leading on to small business SMB, and really shifted from small business to the franchise sector. And so I realized at that time I liked helping penetrate different markets. I liked helping brands evolve to where they could scale. And understanding being in those war rooms, I learned a lot from how to take entrepreneurs making anywhere between mid-level 6 figures to them breaking into millions and then going into 7 figures, 8 figures, and so on. And that shift really happened where I realized that helping these companies scale, I had to scale with them. So going from SMB to mid-market, and I categorize mid-market as a big spread, right? So you have downstream, midstream, upstream. It's a huge. So anywhere when you're starting to break it down, and I break it down into ARR, which is annual reoccurring revenue. So 50 million up to $1 billion is where I call mid-market. Anywhere between 1 to 50 million, you're talking SMB, small to medium-sized businesses. And then large enterprise, that goes on higher. You can talk about seats from employees, company size that way, but I like to talk about revenue because everything for me is built on revenue and loyalty. So as I was scaling with these companies, I realized that my sweet spot was mid-market, and understanding that mid-market, there was one goal, is to outshine their competitors and then scale into large enterprise. And so the problem with that is when you break the threshold for mid-market, you're dealing with a whole different animal, right? You're dealing with brands that are already seasoned, they're already mature, they're not in adolescence or infancy by any means. So the strategies are different, but they also have the capital that allows them to really create the strategy and really facilitate the desired results that they're wanting to garner. So for me, I started to build a core offer that really resonated about that strategy and, then helping them propel through mid-market to large enterprise. Then I started working with a lot of large enterprise right before COVID. And now I'm at a point in my life to where I understand 100% that small entrepreneur, small business cannot compete with a big brand without spending, right? A big
Right,
brand
right.
rush, and pay per click and all of these things and SEO, SEM, anything paid advertising. But branding is not paid advertising and branding is not marketing. And so there are things that entrepreneurs and small business can do that can compete with large brands because the way I explain it to my clientele, especially with this pivot now, is that big brands are like a tanker, like a huge ship or a cruise ship. It takes miles to turn around. Whereas small, nimble brands are like speedboats and they can
Yeah.
180 without hesitation because there's no red tape. So just for example, just to get any kind of initiative started, and when you're talking about like Hershey's, for example, I remember going through a year cycle of going through every market because every department is siloed, right? And so they all have these budgets that they have to have, and the only way they can expand their budgets is by commingling their budgets and getting buy-in from a different department. And so you have to go through this, and then by the time you go through pitching each department, you're dealing with leadership at every level once you get to the end goal, and then you move to another department leaders. So it could take a long time, whereas small business or even smaller mid-market companies, you're just dealing directly with the leadership at hand, and you can make these adjustments very quickly.
Yeah.
So and that goes through every initiative. So there are things in branding that can be done, and you can outperform or even be on the same level with these monster brands to garner mind share and market share. And so that's what
Right.
I'm teaching. It's not necessarily trying to outspend them. It's just trying to outthink them.
Right. Well, what that brings to mind is, having built brands that move markets, right? And now working with founders where quite often the brand is you. The brand may be the founder, it's their reputation. It's it's more it's more rooted in the personality involved. What changes when the brand is you?
So, and this is something that is very near and dear to me. Actually, I had this kind of revelation when I was younger in my career, and I read this book called The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, and it changed my life. I tell entrepreneurs this all day long. Anybody that says they have a startup, they have a small business, I tell them, if I could put $10 million in front of you right now and change the course of the trajectory of your business, would you read this book? And I used to have copies on, and I would just give them these books. And the thing is it shows the shift between infancy, adolescence, and mature businesses. And you should never operate in that category. You should operate in the sense and the mindset that you're a mature business. So you need to create systems and structures, and you need to take your name out of the equation, unless you're an influencer. If you're having an influencer strategy and you are trying to create a personal brand of authority, to have the brand go to reinforce your position, reinforce your brand, then absolutely, by all means, that is the strategy that works best. And that's usually built in B2B. But if you're a B2C corporation, you really need to get out of that spotlight if you are all about yourself, and Michael Gerber talks about this as being the technician. Being a technician is not just creating a business, that creates another job. It's not working in your business, it's working on your business, and everybody's heard that, and he coined it. It's one of the, you know, so you have to really extract yourself and make the brand something that's relatable to your core audience in each segment. They have to be like-minded. They have to understand that the brand becomes humanized in a way that understands values, beliefs, understands principles, and, you know, just basically the genetics of the corporation should be structured like a human being. So
Yeah.
that way you can build that rapport. And that's what I do. So I pioneered brand humanization, and I'm not saying I'm the only one, but 20 something years ago when I finally clicked that we're all humans. We all think the
Yes.
same, right? So why not create a brand versus an intangible entity? Why not make it have a human identity? So that way it can be relatable. And so I started putting a lot of emphasis on understanding the psychology behind purchasing, the psychology behind a purchasing experience, what consumers are going through at every stage. And if you can facilitate the understanding that you're going to meet the challenges that these customers will have at every stage of the purchasing cycle, you're not just going to create the purchase, you're going to create a loyal fanatic if done correctly.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and
Well,
that's,
this
go ahead,
I'm
sorry.
sorry to stop you, but it really lands with me because this is exactly what I tell my clients when they're saying, how do I, separate myself from the brand because let's say they are the founder, they
Mhm.
created it. Now it has to run, operate without them, which they figured out the mechanics of how it runs, but they haven't figured out the identity. And I say exactly what your philosophy is, which is there are two people here. There's the brand and there's you. It doesn't mean that because you're separating yourself, the brand now has no personality. The brand has values. The brand has a character. The brand has a voice, but so do you. And now what I focus with them on is who are they without that, right? So I say to them sometimes you have it backwards. You're worried about who the brand is without you, but that's not really what it is. It's really who are you
With,
without the brand.
and you are so spot on. And that's one of the first labs that I actually have with my clients.
Yeah,
And I call it the visionary meeting. And so really we define everything and through our discovery process. And what we want to do is extract all of those core fundamental attributes that they have as leadership and then infiltrate that through every department in a branding strategy that resonates with through internal company culture and external brand culture. So it's still leadership. It's still who they are. It's still how they think. It's still where they want to go. It's still their vision. However, it's now the brand's vision. And I
yeah,
think once you can extract both of that and you understand, okay, this is just the new vehicle. It's not me. This is the new vehicle for how I want my culture to be created, then it becomes very easy to kind of step back and understand. Now, like I said, it all depends on the brand strategy you're having. Sometimes the founder is an absolute necessity to be the
yeah,
face of the brand. And we see it all the time. However, if it doesn't need to be, you don't have to. You just have to need to know how to engineer the brand to facilitate that human experience. And
yeah.
another thing that they do also is you're absolutely right, Hirsch. It's they try to infuse themselves as being one with the company, and their identity is that. However, what they also do is they try to understand from my personal experience, and I've had a lot of it, people don't buy what you sell. People become what they are by choosing your product or your company.
Yeah.
And that's the epiphany, right? That's the aha moment when people stop trying to sell the product or the service and they start understanding that they need to develop the brand around and the identity around the outcome. And that could be lifestyle, that could be livelihood. You are going to create a utility for that consumer and hopefully strong enough to where it can be a daily application. The more they are
Yeah.
engaged with the brand, the more they do with the brand, the more they are involved with the brand. And that's not just saying community, but all aspects, the more loyal they become.
Well, so what about where there may be a message to market misalignment that's killing sales because the brand, let's say it could be a small business, like we've been talking about, but where that message, that personality brand is not carrying to the sales effort.
So that's a great question. And I think it all comes down to discovery and audit, right? You really have to understand how to diagnose what's wrong. So, for example, and I always give this analogy, when you go to a doctor and you say, I have a pain in my shoulder, and the doctor immediately gives you some pills for the pain, he's not giving you a
Right.
cure. He's giving you a substitute for the time being. And what happens when you go to another doctor and he says, okay, I'm going to give you my opinion. I think you need surgery because I think the ligaments are damaged completely. They're severed and you need to, that's his opinion. However, if you go to a third doctor and they say, well, first of all, before we do anything, we're going to perform x-rays and then we're going to do an MRI. And then we're going to study these x-rays and MRI to really diagnose what the issue is. And then we're going to treat it from that point on. Surgery is the last resort. That's the doctor you want, right? That's the doctor that's just not giving you his egocentric opinion based off of his experiences of what worked for him or others. He's actually trying to diagnose with data. And that's ultimately where I always say if you don't start with research and data, you're only guessing, and then you'll be second guessing.
Right.
So it's just one of these things where you have to really understand your market. You have to understand your audience. You have to be able to understand that your audience is broad. It's not small. And what I mean by broad is it's not an entirety where most people think I'm selling to everyone. It's not that at all. It's a small fraction of that.
Yeah.
However, it's broad in the terms of it's segmented by different categories. So you can bucket your audience in different ways. Some people have three different segments in their audience. And I've performed brand audits where we do consumer modeling studies where it's 15 different segments. Those get very complex, but there's a lot
Yeah.
of variables that play it. So really, overall, you're trying to message and appeal and allure a audience segment in each facet going through the customer experience. So the brand needs to be able to communicate on an overarching platform per these segments. And until you understand those segments, you're not going to know how to communicate with them.
Yeah, yeah, well said. Let's go a little meta now. If we look at your brand, your authority brand, and thinking to ourselves, well, how does Ron scale his brand? A lot of the listeners are consultants and share our expertise, and we're used to working with the client. That's really where we get our greatest joy. But the question is, how do you then scale your own authority to become an even bigger or broader brand? What are your thoughts about that?
I love that question. Okay, so there's a difference between, so the answer is awareness, right? And what people don't understand too a lot of the times is they think exposure is the same thing as awareness.
Right.
Two different concepts altogether. Exposure is to be seen, right? But if you're in the sea of same, how do you stand out? How do you become
Yeah.
memorable? Awareness is to be known. And so, for example, what I'm doing right now, I'm a guest on a very reputable podcast that you have, and I come in and I give my insights. These insights aren't ChatGPT. They're almost 30 years of experience, right?
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of people don't understand is you need to be visible and you need to place yourself in a incredible strategies. So,
Yeah.
working on my first book, 30,000 words in already. The goal is to create a podcast for myself, which is called the Brand Shift Code, and that's going to be coming out in hopefully Q2, maybe Q3. Doing guest appearances on podcasts. The end goal is, obviously for me is TED Talks, books, and coaching. All different segments and categories throughout the business world. But ultimately, it's just presenting yourself in a way that really showcases genuinely being through trust, because branding and marketing and advertising, if you don't have credibility and trust that is genuine, you have nothing.
Yeah.
So it's basically the proof is in the pudding, right? So you put out everything that you understood and that you've known and that you've cultured, that you've invented, that you have helped create the results from those ideas that you have formulated and then engineered to really facilitate somebody else's successes and growth. All of that plays into a brand authority around a personal brand. But that's different too, because my brand and my company, that goes very heavily because people will go, and not only the Google reviews, where it's like a B2C company, they're going to go and deep dive who the founder is of this company. They're going to go to my LinkedIn. They're going to read all of my articles. They're going to read my posts. They're going to see everything that I've done, my thoughts. They're going to go to my website. They're going to see that kind of thing where they're really going to be very judgmental. And that's part of the cycle, right? That's part of any
Right.
kind of adoption. And human beings, and it's funny to me because everybody always says that, you shouldn't judge, but human beings are wired to judge.
Yeah.
That's how we survived all these years. We sized up our prey, we sized up our enemies, we sized up, the environment. We're constantly judging, and that's a survival instinct. Now we don't need to survive anymore. We have to use judgment in a different way. And sometimes it's the wrong way, but most of the times it's just innate in us. It's instinctive.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
people will judge you, and it's not wrong. It's what are you going to show them that they can judge? And it all falls into being credible and being trustworthy.
Well, and the way you laid it out makes perfect sense because the one to many model only makes sense when the experiences one to one have borne fruit, right? So, I used to be a comedian, but then I started working more one on one with clients and all of that. And then it became, okay, well, now I have something to write a book about. Now I have something. The podcast is one to many, but at the same time, it's really a forum for the guest to share their views and insights. But at the same time, now you get to a point where, okay, now you can guest. Now you can be a guest and
Mhm.
be an expert and share your. So it's a natural progression and extension of the experiences that you accumulate over 30 plus years in business. And I agree. It's exactly the distinction with ChatGPT, which is marvelous utility and all of that. We all use it for what we use it for, but really, it's there to work in concert with our decades and decades of experience.
Right.
Without all of those decades of experience, we ourselves would not be authority brands. We wouldn't have our own authority to bring to it. Let's close this with a thought from you for the small to medium business owner. Circling back to thinking like a big brand. And my question will be, how do you get, what would you say to someone who would say, well, how big should I think?
As big as possible. And it's funny because I tell my kids this. And I heard this a long time ago, and I have no idea who came up with it. So it is anonymous for me. But it really resonated with me. It's reach for the stars, because if you only come down with a handful of clouds, you did well.
Mm, that's nice.
So as you always understand that you're probably never going to hit your loftiest goal anyway. So you have to think as large as you possibly can. And that's always the goal. That's always and in your mind, you have to understand that you're going to achieve that goal. So for me, it's understanding, and this is the way I really formulate a lot of the strategies I work on, because brand strategy is where that's my wheelhouse, is understanding how to create the strategy, how to develop the tactics, and then how to facilitate a plan that goes to meet those. So really what I do is I find out the goal, lofty or not, and then I break it down and reverse engineer everything and then understand that there's milestones to get to that goal. So I define those milestones. And this is really important for entrepreneurs to understand is because what people don't understand is they're scrolling on the internet and they're seeing this guy say this and that guy say this and this, and understanding the differences in marketing, branding, and advertising or sales, operations. Everything has a different function. So you can't listen to somebody over here. You have to really understand what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, not what somebody else is telling you to do, unless they understand you on a personal level and they are your coach. And I really strongly believe that everybody needs coaching. I've had several throughout my career, and they've helped me power level, just because when you understand where they've been, what they've been, they've seen it all. And I call it the war room. I've been in hundreds of war rooms that nobody sees. I understand the challenges. I understand the successes. I understand all of those things, as do other coaches. So it's really understanding that unless you're working with someone one-on-one, what you really want to happen is a personal goal that you have for yourself, for your company. And you need to define those. And then you need to define the milestones. And then you start from ground zero. Okay, to reach this first milestone, what are the steps that I need to do? And it's funny because the unknown is what people fear. But as soon as you have a plan, you finally realize, oh, all I have to do is this step. And then I move on to this step. And then I move on to this step. It becomes very methodical. And then you start to understand, you're starting to see your whole ecosystem change, your whole environment, because you're taking these small steps. And there's an old saying that, the quickest way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. Right? Or the only way to make 1,000-step journey is starting with the first step. And so
Right.
once you can do that, you start to understand that there's no anxiety anymore about the unknown. You understand the goal, you reverse engineer it, you understand the milestones, and when you hit those milestones, you're going to understand like this is working. And so you're going to be, more excited and more motivated to move on through discipline and things along those lines that move you through that journey. But I think that's the most important thing to really understand is to come up with a lofty goal and understand that that goal is going to be one of very many other micro goals that all accumulate into that large desirable outcome. And even if it doesn't, just think about how you move along that timeline and the things that you accomplish. And that's another thing too, is marketing and branding and advertising. And I used to write a lot of articles and trying to explain the difference to my clients. And then they led into paragraphs, which nobody ever reads. So then I came up with just some words that make it make sense. And I'll leave on this note. Branding is definitely positioning, but it starts with awareness that leads to positioning, that leads to adoption, that leads to loyalty. Marketing and that's long-term strategy. You can't develop a brand overnight. It doesn't work that way. No ROI will come from brand development. But however, all ROI from sales, marketing, operations, from team culture, all of it is derived from brand and from brand identity. So let that sink in. All the ROI comes from everything else once the brand is established. So, and marketing is it's a very short-term cycle. People don't understand this. They think marketing has to be all the time. It is all the time, but marketing is recognition that leads to retention. Retention is only ongoing because of the cycle that the more paid ads you're doing, the more, and that's really what marketing is. Marketing is a strategy that leads to retention that then leads to advertising, which is promoting, and then through sales. So as soon as you stop that cycle, that hamster wheel, all of your revenue from marketing stops. Branding, on the other hand, is a long-term cycle that becomes perception. I'd rather have loyalty and perception than retention, but you need them both, right? You can't not focus on one or the other. And then most people think branding is for large companies, which it kind of is, and done right, because branding isn't a logo or a website or a brochure. It's a lot more than that. It's the internal makeup of the identity that then leads to all of the creative work. But so yeah, so it's all of those things that, and so you just have to understand the differences between what branding is, marketing is, and advertising is, and then strategically how to really adapt them to your business to make sure that you're understanding long-term and short-term gains.
Wonderful. Well, we're of one mind on a lot of these things, and yet we're serving different audiences and we have different perspectives, and I really love the way you brought it all together. Thanks, Ron, for being on the show. Ron Netanel, is there a good or best way to find you if the audience wants to track you down?
Absolutely. And actually, I do have a DIY for your listeners. I put up a landing page. It's called the brandshiftcode.com. Again, that's brandshiftcode.com. What you can do is you fill out the form. It's just very quick and simple. Schedule a call with me. If in that 10-minute call, if you are able, like I said in the very beginning of your show, this episode, not all brands can't compete with a large brand. You have to understand that you have to be in a certain spot revenue wise to be able to facilitate some of these initiatives. And there's a lot of things that you don't need. It's just, internal and just development. However, if I feel that you are 100% ready to go to develop some of these principles that are in the brand shift code, I will send you the PDF. And then we can talk about that a little bit further. You could even, the entrepreneur could, and this is really for entrepreneurs hitting anywhere between 1 million or close to 10 million in ARR, trying to go to medium-sized status to then break the threshold and get to mid-market. And that's what I developed the brand shift code for. It's a strategic way of your mindset to shift from small business and just thinking you have to just do marketing nonstop, and how to also adopt branding and marketing to work together. But it's all about a mindset shift. But I also have a coaching program, and that's what this is. This brand shift code is my coaching program. But I did make a downloadable DIY version of it, and your audience can definitely go there, and I will absolutely send it to them, absolutely free.
All right.
If you liked the show,
Yes, and
it worked for you,
yes, then
subscribe and leave a
yes, friend.
5-star review.
Yes, friend.
Tell all your friends.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Did I make it clear?
Yes, friend.
Get your branding on
Yes.
before they're gone.
Yeah. Huh?